r/AskReddit. Hiring managers of Reddit. What's your favorite they were perfect until we googled them story? I was interviewing a chef for my business. The interview went great, and he had an excellent resume. Worked at some of the top restaurants in the world, 3 Michelin star type places. Even did a short cooking test with some spare ribs and they were incredible. There was some stiff competition though, so eventually we decided to look at everyone's Facebook profiles. One of his old profile pics was him at a Mardi Gras parade dressed as Pikachu with a big dildo strapped on. He got the job. Everything looked good on her resume. She was very professional and enthusiastic in her interview and just had that thing. That self-starter attitude that made you feel like this girl is going to get it done. Well, ran a background check and literally nothing checked out. She was not actually licensed in her field like she claimed, and she had about a dozen priors for various white-collar crimes and none of her work history or references checked out. I guess she was just hoping that her charisma would win us over and that we wouldn't bother checking up on her. I was a restaurant manager and the owner hired this guy as a chef without doing basic research, which he did a few times. Anyways, the guy said he had won several awards and worked with celebrities, etc. The guy was a total dick to everyone on staff. I decided to Google him. First hit is a mugshot from a drug arrest. Then more articles. One about where he lied about getting a James Beard award from a previous restaurant he worked at. A comment about him owing $25,000 or something to his former boss. The only positive restaurant review he had was from 1990. I came in after the weekend to show my boss this stuff, when I learned he was fired the night before for exposing himself to one of the waitresses. This kid, early 20s, comes in for a job, seemed normal enough. Google him and he was wanted in another state for stabbing a Saint Bernard to death. I share my dad's name, so when you Google my name you pull up his exploits. Stuff like being arrested for having 7 semi-trucks worth of weed in his driveway. Thanks dad. This is why I am glad my parents didn't name me after my grandpa, since my uncle is also named after my grandpa, and uncle is like a heroin addict and rapist. Where does someone get 7 trucks full of weed? They grow it on a 20 square mile ranch in West Texas. The thing is, he got off on it because by the time the trial came around all of the weed was gone. But that wasn't even a blip on the radar compared to all of his other very public, very illegal exploits. Really nice, clean-cut young man from the nearby college applies in my shop. Sweet, friendly, outgoing and smart. He was perfect. Until we googled him. He had a last name that was the same as a girl I had gone to school with. So I googled his name, found his Facebook and discovered that he was actually her little brother. I immediately called my friend, his sister, and said, "Hey, your brother just applied in my shop. I'm gonna hire him." She said, "Sweet, free ice cream." So he was perfect until I googled him, and then he was even better. He worked for me for 2 years and was a delight. Hiring private tutors to work with middle school students. Had a great conversation with a girl. She stressed how much she wants to be a role model for young girls, basically exactly what we were looking for. Then I googled her and the first picture on her Facebook is her doing a line. Who the hell posts themselves doing a line on Facebook and keeps it public? Cocaine apart, she doesn't sound bright enough to private tutor anyone. Oh, I've got a good one. We had hired a new entry-level graphic designer. Let's call him Will. He had talent and a decent portfolio, but there were some strange things right from the beginning. For example, he would always come in wearing expensive suits, despite our being a jeans and t-shirt office, and his having a very low-paid position. We didn't care much about that. No clue how he affords that wardrobe, but that's none of our business. He's a designer, and I guess he likes to look nice. The weirdest thing was that he adamantly refused to accept direct deposit for his paycheck. He wanted a physical check every other week. Strange, but okay. Designers are eccentric sometimes. So, one evening we're all working really late on a project together. We've got some bottles of wine around, some pizzas, etc. It's miserably long hours, but we're a good team and having a good time. All of a sudden Will looks up from his computer and fucking runs as fast as he can out the door. Not a word to any of us. He just dashes out. We all look at each other, try calling him, etc. with no answer. We finish up the project and go home still wondering what happened. The next day Will doesn't come into work. He doesn't come in the next day either. We try calling his emergency contact, but don't get any response there either. So we Google him and see the FBI press release. Turns out he was arrested about 500 miles from our office a few hours after he ran out. I guess he got a tip that the FBI was onto him and decided to make a run for it. Turns out he had been defrauding payroll companies for years, to the tune of about $1 million. That's why he didn't want direct deposit for his paycheck. What he didn't know was that we processed our physical checks through the same payroll company as our direct deposit, and they reported his new address to the FBI. Oops. I was hiring for our late night shifts ending at 2 and 3 am, and she was willing to work anything and looking for about 25 hours per week. This was absolutely what the company was looking for. She had mentioned that she was grieving her little boy who passed 2 weeks ago and needed to do something to occupy her time. She finished her 1 day of computer training and stopped showing up. Later in the week she sent me an email stating that she wasn't ready to come back to work like she'd thought, which was understandable. My assistant manager and I decided to look her up only to find that she had multiple GoFundMe pages set up for her sob story with different amounts of time that the supposed child had been dead for. Her Facebook was full of selfies and party photos. She ended up asking for the job back a few months later and we shot her down pretty quick. We had a near miss, one senior hire. We were talking about him and how something seemed a little off when we googled him. It was like he didn't exist at all, and the odd super positive tidbit of information that was always a bit too much of a stretch to be completely believable. I mean, 1 or 2 people saying you're the best thing on earth is one thing, but this was like all you got were these sporadic and hyper-manic observations. One of the junior members of the team pipes up at this point. She's overheard what we're talking about. Turns out she's worked the last 2 places he's worked and he's like a locust. He's extremely good at his job but an absolute nightmare in all other ways. Sexual harassment, bullying, turning up wasted. He has a really niche skill set. There are always more roles than people to fill, so he hops along, bullies everyone out of their role in his team, brings in his entourage to the point where almost anyone normal graduates because the atmosphere is so toxic. Then when HR try and step in, he hits them with a constructive dismissal case and drags lawyers, and so there's no paper trail. She said he'd done it at her last job and the one before. It's one of those things that once you know, you start to notice stuff. So at events when somebody mentioned this guy's name, half the table would just give each other a look and the others would have no idea. It's not quite an open secret, but it's definitely on the grapevine anecdotally if not formally. Glad we dodged that bullet. Had a guy apply for an entry-level post with us recently. His CV was okay, so we offered him an interview. Social media seemed okay too. He never turned up for the interview. A couple of weeks later, there's a story about him in the local paper. Turned out that he was living at the local boarding house and was found in the kitchen one morning totally wasted, wearing nothing but a pair of socks. When a couple of women who also lived there tried to escort him back to his room, he got violent and assaulted them. Given the date stated in the paper, he didn't turn up because he'd been in jail at the time of the interview. His resume has now been added to the do not touch with a 10-foot barge pole section in our filing cabinet. I was interviewing a much older guy for a similar position of mine. Everything seemed okay, and he was our best candidate. Before moving forward, I did a quick Google search to only find out that he was fired from his previous job because of stealing $5,000 worth of computer equipment. My director hired him anyway. Well, he's already got the equipment he needs. We should be fine. Not the hiring manager, but I was the intern responsible for checking references and running backgrounds at our company, and this was in my first week where I was just learning how to go about things. This guy did great in the interview, so I got the go ahead to run a background check and call his references. Something popped up in his background, so I had to call the police station to figure out how to get a copy of the police report since whatever happened had just happened. I talked to someone on the phone and gave them his name and who I was and what I was calling for. After doing so, whoever I was talking to didn't know how to go about obtaining the information on her end. She put me on a brief hold, then took a callback number and promised to call me back with some info. Well, it's a good thing neither of us knew what to do because I received a call from the police department less than an hour later. An officer told me I'm really not supposed to be doing this, but I just wanted to let you know that interview guy had been arrested for carjacking a woman and that woman works at your company. He saw the company name and the guy's name and warned us. I'm so grateful too. I wasn't the hiring manager, but my teammate was. A candidate came through that he and some other members interviewed and seemed pretty okay for the job until they checked her out. Turns out she was suing the company. Yes, the one she applied for a job for, so my teammate ended up not hiring her. Ducking like and subscribe.